Welcome to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is Dan Cardile, who's a staff attorney at the Family Law Self-Help Center in Montgomery County. Thanks so much for being here, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Regina.
Absolutely. So I feel like the Self-Help Center is this little treasure that may not be so well known in our county, and I'm hoping that maybe you can start by explaining to us what is the Self-Help Center.
Sure. The Self-Help Center is a walk-in legal clinic that provides a range of services for unrepresented parties who are involved in a family law case. Anything from divorce and all the pieces that go with that, custody, child support, those kinds of things. There's no appointment necessary. It's located in the second floor of the Montgomery County Circuit Court in room 224. It's open from 8 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, although realistically, because it gets so busy there, if you don't show up by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, most likely you wouldn't be seen that day. And we take people as a walk-in basis.
And how long has it been around?
The Self-Help Center exists in its present form since the late 1990s, so about 15 years.
Okay.
So.
And that was the model that they used then in the D.C. court, am I right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the same thing is now available also for D.C. residents.
That's correct.
And what was the purpose for the creation of the Self-Help Center?
The purpose of the Self-Help Center is to provide guidance for unrepresented individuals in family law matters, not just to help with forms or pleadings, although that's a big part of it, but also to talk and to counsel and to find out maybe what else can be done other than file this pleading to cope with and deal with the situation that they're in, whether it's a pre-litigation reality or more often than not a post-judgment reality. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes our job is as much of helping people cope with the reality of the post-judgment universe and how to work with dealing with that, as opposed to maybe continuing to have litigation after litigation. So really it's to provide guidance for individuals all along the continuum of pre-judgment and post-judgment issues.
Now, when I was trained to volunteer in D.C. for the Self-Help Center, they told us very clearly, you're here to provide information, but you're not here to represent anybody. So we didn't take cases and actually go into the courtroom with people. That's the same in Maryland, am I right?
It's the same model, right? We don't represent anyone. We don't, for example, make phone calls or write letters on their behalf. But we do provide all the information, advice, some degree of strategy, assistance with doing the pleadings or the motions or whatever else might need to be done short of representation and discovery, those kinds of higher order things, which obviously we don't have time to do since we see about, 10,000 people a year.
Are you serious? Wow.
About 40 to 50 people a day, depending on the day. So I might see anywhere from 10 to 15 people a day. So certainly I can't sit down for 3 hours and answer 30 interrogatories for people. And besides, there's a whole bar out there of people who that's where they need to go. If their case is that complicated, then they need to hire someone or work through the bar association and get themselves represented.
Makes sense. Are there people that are bilingual that maybe have other language skills at the Self-Help Center?
Yes, so there are 4 attorneys and 1 secretary. The secretary is there not only to sort of do crowd control and keep order, which is very important, but she's also a native Spanish speaker. Okay. So she is invaluable, obviously. She spends at least half of her time translating in addition to normal secretarial duties. The courthouse also has several translators who are, of course, busy in trials and those kinds of matters. However, we can grab them as need be, sort of in between their hearings, to come and sit in with us and translate. 2 of the 4 attorneys have some proficiency in Spanish. I'm one of them. It's limited. I can get through a standard interview and give very basic advice. Go
Okay,
through.
let's switch to Spanish then.
Well, yo hablo poquito español.
Okay.
But so there is that. But if it gets more, if the case becomes complicated or people begin asking complicated questions, I get a translator.
Is that the most common language other than English that people are using?
I would say the order of second languages is Spanish, then French, a lot of African French speakers, and then third, Amharic. We get a lot of Amharic speakers, but they tend to speak, their English tends to be pretty good, because generally they're not able to get here without being able to speak some English. But we do see a lot of Amharic speakers who do struggle with English.
And how is the Self-Help Center funded? Is this the taxpayer dollars that are funding it? People don't have to pay to make an appointment to see you.
It's a free service. I joke with people that I used to cost $230 an hour, but now I'm free. It is a taxpayer-funded service. It's funded by the state of Maryland through the Administrative Office of the Courts, better known as the AOC. That's correct.
Okay. And a lot of the forms that you're helping people fill out, they can get online. Am I right?
That's correct. A lot of the forms are available on the Montgomery County government website. You go to the Montgomery County government website and look at the menu to the courts, and then domestic relations, and then forms, and then an entire menu will drop down, and you can navigate the menu to try to find what it is that you're looking for that might fit your particular need.
Do you find that most people have already completed these forms and they're coming in asking you to review them, or no, they don't even know how to navigate the website?
Both. Many people come in with a form blank, saying, please help me with this.
Okay.
Many people come in with a form that's completely wrong for what it is that they're there for, and we start over. Many people come in and have no idea that there are such things as forms or computers or websites. Many people come in with every form perfectly completed and just said, well, I just want someone to review this so I know that it's fine. So that really is the whole spectrum of things that we see.
Okay. And what are the most common actions that people are getting advice for or help with?
Well, usually custody tends to be the most common case. Obviously, people come in with an idea of what custody is and how to go about, seeking it, but haven't done the forms correctly, or don't understand the differences between physical custody and legal custody, don't understand rights of other parties, don't understand various procedural steps that they're going to have to go through. So we spend a lot of time on those kinds of cases. Also, of course, divorce and the things that are attendant to that, and child support as well. We also spend a lot of time helping people with service, which baffles everyone.
Really?
It baffles everyone of all education levels, from people with a second-grade education who can't read or write either in English or in their own native language, to people with post-college degrees. They come in and they have, for example, it's particularly common with well-educated people who have already done their forms, gotten them filed, and assumed that things were just going to happen magically from there. Understood that there was something called service, but assumed that maybe the court was going to do it or someone else would do it for them. And then they get the 2507 letter from the court saying, we're going to dismiss your case.
Right.
So I will explain service, how it's done, what it is, the various options for getting it done. And then I'll ask them to repeat it back to me what it is they're going to do. And even very well-educated people get it wrong. They fail my test.
Yeah.
So I do it again. And then about half the people get it right. And then I do it again. And then usually people have an idea of what service is. I think it should be taught in school in 11th grade or 12th grade so that people have some idea of what service is, because it's the second most important thing in a court case after filing.
Right. Yeah, and people really have a hard time understanding why they can't just hand, the other person the pieces of paper that need to be served.
That's right.
And it's like, well, because you're a party to the case,
That's right.
and you could lie and say you gave them when you didn't. That's why we want the little green card confirming if someone picked the stuff up at the post office, or we want a process server that can file an affidavit. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't really matter. People of any education spectrum are going to have an issue with service. Yeah. So when you see that, like, a case is super complicated and this person is not going to be able to handle it themselves, where do you refer them to?
We have a common saying in the Self-Help Center that we say a lot to people. That is to say, This is not a do-it-yourself case. Now, some cases are, many cases are not. So early on, either people coming in before a case has been filed or coming in after they've been served, we'd kind of talk through the interview, find out what the issues are, and if it turns out that it's going to be either a hotly contested custody case or a divorce case where there's lots of money, there's potentially going to be alimony and property division of substantial value, those kinds of things, we immediately urge people, okay, this is the kinds of things you're going to expect from your case. This is the way you would do it were you to handle it on your own. So we'll spend a lot of time doing that, and then conclude with, but don't do that. Don't do it by yourself. Hire a lawyer if you can, because usually if there is money in the case such that it's complicated, there's going to be something there to use to hire a lawyer. Or if for some reason that's simply impossible, then we urge people to call the pro bono program, or the Archdiocesan Legal Network, or the Legal Aid Bureau, which are all organizations that you can call, and they can try to help you find a lawyer to represent you for free, although that takes weeks and weeks or a month or 2 or 3, if at all.
Well, they're understaffed and overworked, right? There's so many people that just can't afford lawyers, and they're only going to take the truly needy people.
That's right. That's exactly right. So the demand is very great and the supply is much lower for actual representation in a complicated divorce case or a hotly contested custody case. We also encourage people to call the Montgomery County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service, which can assist people in finding attorneys not for free like the pro bono program, but for a lower fee, something that someone can afford. It's still difficult, but these are important things, obviously, and you should pay for them. I often tell people that when your pipes break, you don't always get to call the free plumber. You have to call the plumber because that's important. You need your water, and same thing in your life. When you need a lawyer, sometimes you just have to find some money to pay.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the plumber, because I have to tell you, it's one of my pet peeves. People are like, well, why can't you just do a free consult? Because you're using my time and I'm giving you valuable information. So I'm not doing a free consult, right? Now, I might, reduce somebody's rate. I try to flat fee things when possible. But, yeah, I don't know why everybody has an okay time paying for everything else. Like your car breaks down, you pay the mechanic, right? You have a toothache, you go to the dentist and you pay, right? Whether they give you good service or not, just to look and see what the problem is. Every service you call will be charging you a service fee. My stove broke the other day. $75 just to come and take a look, whether they could fix it or not. So I don't understand this problem that we have in our society, somehow thinking that it is okay to call and ask for free legal services. It's just not going to happen.
The Self-Help Center only assists people of very, very low income, and we do some sort of an assessment to figure out what that is, and usually we're pretty good about that. We'll meet with anybody once, so someone can come in and they make $300,000 a year, and that actually might be a much longer interview than someone for whom I'm doing a complaint with very little income, and I might spend an hour or so with that one individual. They can't come back. Then we
I was going to ask you. Okay.
We last time them, we put it in our system, and they're done. Even if they come back and they've somehow lost their job, they're still done.
Okay.
So we'll meet with anybody once, but generally only repeatedly with people of very limited means who can show to some extent that they have that limited means. Because you're right, people with means, a lawyer's time is their only stock in trade, so that's the only thing they have to give, and of course you'll have to pay for that if you have the means to do so. That's right.
Makes sense. We're going to take a short break, and then we will be right back.
Needle? Thread? Scalpel.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Welcome back to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is a staff attorney from the Self-Help Center in Montgomery County Circuit Court, Dan Cardile. Thanks so much for being here, Dan.
Thanks, Regina.
So we're talking about, before the break, screening some cases out, and I was wondering what you guys do with domestic violence cases. Do you handle those?
We don't handle domestic violence cases. Those are highly specialized cases. We refer them to, we call it Room 307 in the courthouse. It's the House of Ruth domestic violence unit of the circuit court, and we encourage people, if they have a genuine domestic violence issue, to go there. Obviously, we'll talk to people about what the issues might be to see if there is something there that statutorily they might be eligible for relief. Sometimes there simply is not.
Right.
But if there appears to be something that might be going on, that for which they can be a person entitled to relief, we refer them to that clinic.
Okay. And I noticed recently, they're really doing a much better job of screening out these cases that may have domestic violence in our courtroom for mediation. So these cases are not going into mediation if there's a history of domestic violence. Am I right?
That's correct. That's an assessment that's done on multiple steps. First, just on the case information report when you file something. All along the way, there's a couple of different checks to see that whether or not this is a case that's useful for mediation or not, and if there's ever been a genuine history of any sort of domestic violence, then those cases don't end up in mediation. It's just not useful.
Right, because the power imbalance is too great. Yeah.
That's right.
But most people, when they go to that first scheduling conference, will be ordered to go to mediation. Am I right?
That is correct. Historically, that was done more frequently because of funding issues. There's less people are ordered to mediation, less and less. However, at the scheduling hearing, commonly the master will direct people to go upstairs to what they call now the facilitator,
right,
upstairs to the law library, because many of these cases, particularly custody cases, are not very contested. They're only a little bit contested.
Right.
And if the two litigants can sit together in a room and talk to someone who appears to have some authority and some knowledge of what's going on, and can give them some suggestions as to what might happen when they go to court, people are very interested in settling, and oftentimes, with the help of the facilitator, they'll actually write out the consent order right there. Or if they're too busy up in the facilitator will send them back down to us, and we can help write a consent order, which both parties sign, which ends up being filed, and then that ends the case.
Wow. So you find a lot of people are settling after they go to the facilitator?
I do find that.
Okay.
I do think that I don't have necessarily hard data on this,
No.
but it seems to me that anywhere from at least 60 to 3/4 of the cases tend to settle either right after the scheduling hearing or before at the pretrial hearing.
Right.
Court. No one likes to go to court. Many people seem to have a lot of bravado about court early on, but then that first hearing is a little unnerving, it's a little frightening, and people, once they get some sort of an assessment as to how things might go down in court, they're more interested in settling.
Well, unless you have those high conflict personalities, that 20% of our population that just loves conflict and they just thrive, and you guys see those files that are like 9 or 10, jackets full of nothing but pleading.
See that every day, and I promise you that I and all the other lawyers there do everything we can. We don't just sit there and say, okay, let's go ahead and do the pleading, let's go ahead and do the motion, there it is. We talk to people. We try to help them see that this might not be useful to either them or especially their children to continue to litigate these things. Oftentimes, ongoing litigation is occasionally necessary, but oftentimes is not. So, although sometimes it doesn't do any good to talk people through these things, because if they're determined to file something and be litigious, they will be. But sometimes we still believe that it's useful to try to talk people down from filing yet another modification or yet another contempt.
No, I think that's interesting that you do that too, because a lot of what I'm doing is mostly counseling people, like talking them off the cliff.
Yes.
It's like, I'm trying to get you not to jump off that cliff.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So I want to ask you about these child support matters, because we do have the Office of Child Support Enforcement, right, that's available to any Montgomery County citizen that wants to seek child support for a child.
That's right.
Do you automatically refer them to the Child Support Enforcement, or do you actually help some people file on their own?
We don't automatically refer them to the Montgomery County Office of Child Support Enforcement. It's a wonderful office. They do wonderful work, but they have at any given time, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 65,000 cases which they carry. So they're very busy, and as child support oftentimes goes along with custody cases.
Right.
So I'll be going through a custody pleading with someone, and then when we get to the area about child support, I'll suggest that they have a choice of two. They can seek it on their own, through their own pleading in their own custody case, or they can take the issue across the street and open up a separate case with the Montgomery County Office of Child Support Enforcement. And for any number of reasons, whether it's maybe the opposing party's been paying for a couple of years an amount that might be less than what the guidelines would require, but not much less, then maybe they're satisfied enough with that so they don't wish to pursue it, or maybe they have tax returns and lots of data about what the other party's income is, in which case they could do it on their own. But we offer the people the choice as to whether they want to do it on their own or go to the child support office, and for various reasons they choose one or the other.
Now, you have the guidelines and can help them run it in your office, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I often find that, it's just more than anything a lack of information. And once people, they see what the numbers are, it's like, oh, okay, he is paying more or less what he should be paying, right? Same thing with once they go to the parenting classes and they realize, no, sole legal and physical custody is super rare. And actually, we encourage sharing children, right? You've brought them into this world together, you're going to share them until you're out of this world. So it's just a matter of informing people, and then I think they're usually, at least 80%, able to make choices that, avoid going to court for a trial.
I think that's exactly right, and I think that's a lot of what we try to do at the Self-Help Center, not just to do the pleadings, although that's important because those need to be done in order for a case to move forward, but to give them that kind of information so that they're in a better posture emotionally and intellectually to resolve their cases earlier as opposed to having trials later on.
Yeah, the parenting classes, I've never had to do one, but I know that they're automatic. Whenever there's a custody case, they get sent off to parenting classes. What goes on in those classes?
Well, I've never had to do one either. I know that they are 2 classes. They're 3 hours long in length. People come and they frequently ask me, gee, why do I have to go to parenting classes? And people tend to call them parenting classes. Well, they're not parenting classes. They're co-parenting classes.
Right.
So the whole idea, of course, is not how to be a better parent, but to be a better co-parent. And everybody needs strategies for dealing with their opposing party, who they don't necessarily get along with all that well anymore. Everyone needs strategies to deal with that person so that the child can feel loved by everyone and live a happier life. And that's what these classes try to do, to try to give some strategies for dealing with your opposing party so that the child feels secure and not threatened in any way.
Is it taught by live people, or are they sitting down and watching a video?
I don't actually know the answer to that question.
That's okay. I'm
not
just
sure.
curious.
I'm not sure. I believe that it is a live class.
Okay.
But I'm not certain.
I do know that a lot of my clients are very indignant. Like, I can't believe I'm being ordered to go to this class, right? And then afterwards, they actually do appreciate it. So they must be doing something right.
I think the classes, again, I've never attended it, but I have the same experience where people do find it useful because, again, deep down, it's there to help you co-parent, not parent. You're a parent. You're going to do what you're best for your child. But the co-parenting, that's why everyone's there, because they're struggling with that.
Right.
So the strategies offered in that co-parenting class, if you're paying attention, and really people should go to these classes with an open mind and not, just tootling around on their phones, because if you're listening, that's really where you're going to learn, and hopefully the other party will learn some strategies so that their lives can be, and their children's lives can be, a little better in the future.
Right. Are there other resources that you sometimes suggest, especially for people going through a custody case?
One thing a couple of things we do suggest is there is a free mediation clinic in Montgomery County. It's called the Conflict Resolution Center of Montgomery County. You can call them. They will call the opposing party and suggest that everyone get together and try to resolve things. Okay. I don't know how often that's successful. The people who have used it say that it does, sometimes work. And it's something that you don't have to go to the other party and get them to agree to do it first. You can just call them and ask them to call the opposing party. And it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. There's also a new program in Maryland called the Collaborative Project of Maryland, which is by and large free, although for people with more income there's sort of a sliding scale of fees. The whole notion of the Collaborative Project of Maryland is everyone gets their own collaboratively trained lawyer, and there's a coach kind of in the middle exhorting the people on towards some degree of good resolution, like in the collaborative model. And instead of litigating, there's meetings, right? And everyone sits together in the meeting. And the first meeting is often not very productive, but sometimes the subsequent second and third and maybe by the fourth meeting or so things are resolved because everyone, the attorneys that people get and talk to are collaboratively trained, and there's, like I said, that coach that's kind of helping the process along. If it works, and people swear it does, that's great. An order can be a consent order. They can help you write a consent order or a parenting agreement, and that becomes part of the court order. If it doesn't work, then the collaboratively trained lawyers, they vanish, and the two parties are left where they were. But the case was sort of stayed, if you will.
Right.
So they're not suddenly, no one's using the collaborative process to jockey for position later on. At least that's the hope.
No, I think it's a great mechanism to solve cases if people are really focused on a settlement out of court, right? I mean, and I have heard people kind of say that first meeting isn't very productive, but I would disagree. You know, in that first meeting, you're going over what are your goals, not just short-term but long-term, and what are your concerns? Because once you know what somebody's concern is, you can start problem solving. Like if I don't know that the person's concern is that they may not qualify for the house right now, or that the house is underwater and that's why they don't want to sell it, well, how do I know? So I'm just going with what I want, you know, and then it's like, oh, I see. Well, okay, let's figure out. Let's go to a mortgage broker. Let's see whether you can buy me out. Let's go to a realtor and see whether the house, you know, is really worth what I think it is. I mean, it's all about just getting the information. And then, yes, the next couple of meetings are much more productive because people have very specific homework assignments, and they come back hopefully with their homework done, and we throw out all of the possible solutions and then narrow it down to something that everyone can live with. And as long as people realize, look, no one's going to be happy. Whether it's I'm in court, you know, annihilating somebody, someone's going to walk out super unhappy, but even the person paying for me to annihilate the other person is really, at the end of the day, not going to get full satisfaction. It's not a satisfying process. You're ending a marriage. You're ending a relationship. For whatever reason, it did not work out well. And now we're here as professionals just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
That's exactly right. And the collaborative law process it's a great model. It does great work, but it's not, or hasn't been in the past available to poor people.
Right.
So that's what the Collaborative Project of Maryland is trying to do, to say, well, look, these are the people with certain issues that are similar to people with more money, and the model could still work for them just like it does for people with means. Let's try it. So that's what the Collaborative Project of Maryland is all about.
That's great. So if people wanted to contact you for further information, what would be the best way to do that?
Well, the Self-Help Center is not a call-in service.
Okay.
It's only a walk-in service. We're open every day starting at 8 o'clock in the morning on the second floor of the Montgomery County Circuit Court in room 224. There's no appointments necessary, nor are there appointments taken. It's a first come, first serve, and again, we generally tell people to come in by 8 or 8:15. We start seeing people at 8:30. If you're there after 10 or 11, there tends to be a very long wait because it's a highly in-demand service. So we encourage people to get there early, and that's really the only way to meet with one of the 4 lawyers there is to walk in, do an intake, and then wait to be seen.
Is it the same for child support enforcement? You can't make an appointment?
It's similar. It's a little different. You go there. There aren't people just there waiting to meet with you.
Okay.
You show up, and if you're interested in filing a case, they just point you to some forms on the wall. You fill them out. You turn them in, and then you wait usually 1 or 2 or 3 months, depending on various circumstances. And again, they do marvelous work over there, but they have 60 some odd thousand cases, so it's hard. They do their best with what they have, certainly.
Well, you're doing a great job, and thank you so much for coming in today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Making It Last.